she hugged me,
Hmm.
and she hugged me so hard that all my broken pieces went back into place. And it's
Oh,
that moment
whew.
that I realized I had to be involved. I had to do something.
Welcome to Thrive While Loving an Addict. I'm KL Wells, and today I am joined by Doug Ballinger, who is an author, an advocate, and a podcaster too. And he's come through a very painful door to find his purpose and do the work that he does in the world to hopefully transform and change how we view substance use disorder and all that swirls around it, to create a more powerfully compassionate and kind world that is void of judgment around this. And so I want to say thank you to Doug for being here and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. And so if you would step back through for our audience, kind of how the doorway that you walked through in order to become a voice for change.
So I can start with my son, and his story is kind of what it's all about. When Logan was young, he was prescribed medication for attention deficit, ADHD. And so he got that mindset of one, take this pill, everything will be okay. There was never any addressing the underlying issues of what was causing the ADHD. And fast forward into his teen years and adult years, anytime he had an issue, he sought out some substance to try to quiet the noise that was going on in his brain. And I didn't know at the time because I was young when Logan was born, and it was like we were children raising a child.
Right.
And we trusted the guys in the white coats because we're all taught that they know what they're doing and they know everything. So I know now that's a different story, but that's where I'm sitting now to see that. So we struggled with his addiction most of his adult life, and he turned actually to heroin, and because it quiet the noise down in his brain. I've never experienced that. I don't understand how quiet it gets in when someone does heroin. I've talked to other people that suffer from addiction, and nobody ever really lands on a feeling. They just says it relieves the stress, the pain, the anxiety.
Right.
So knowing that my son was having addiction issues, I put him in rehab more than once. But hindsight, putting him in rehab and him desiring to go to rehab are two totally different issues.
Right.
He got arrested a couple of times. I did not bail him out of jail because I could sleep that night. Knowing he was somewhere not on the streets, I could sleep that night. And then on May 19th in 2020, I got a phone call from my father, who lives in Florida. My son lived in Sarasota at the time. And he said, I need to talk to you about Logan. And right there in that instant, in my father's voice, I knew Logan was dead. And my words to him were, he's dead, isn't he? And he said, yes. And that instant in time, everything changed. Everything was before that was different than everything that has come after that. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to act. I didn't know how to grieve. And I still knew that I loved my son even after he was gone. The good news is I immediately, the next day, started posting on Facebook about what caused his death because it was always suspected overdose. There was a little puncture wound in the top of his right hand, kind of between the forefinger and the thumb. So overdose was what I was talking about at that point, not trying to hide it because I wanted the world to know that I knew.
Yeah.
Even before I knew what stigma was, I was talking about that stuff. So after that, I went to some counseling. And it was the beginning of COVID. So, the whole world is isolated from one another. And I was lucky enough to find Jamie and Simone. They actually work for a hospice organization here in Arkansas. And they were starting a Zoom grief support group on Zoom. And I was one of the first people in that group. And they taught me some things, but it really wasn't with a group of people that understood my particular kind of loss.
Right.
When you work for a hospice organization, most of the people that you run into that are grieving are going to be people grieving the death of someone who was on hospice, whether it was end of life because of age or because of some devastating medical diagnosis. So I stayed with that group for about 6 months until I felt comfortable. And then I just kind of stepped back. I floundered for a few years until I went to an event that was being held at the Clinton Library here in Little Rock called Bridge the Gap. I had no idea what it was going to be like. A friend of mine, actually my friend Ann, I was at her house when I got the news, working on my camper. And we went to Bridge the Gap. And it was a point in my life that actually saved my life. Because at that point, I was drowning in a sea of self-misery. I was just sad all the time. I could not pull myself up. Even when I went back occasionally for the Zoom grief support, it wasn't doing what I needed it to do.
Yeah.
So Bridge the Gap is an event. There were maybe 500 people at that particular year's event. And there's a bridge that runs across the Arkansas River from the Clinton Library that is a pedestrian bridge. And after all the conversations and stuff that were happening and the speeches that people gave, it started getting close to sunset. And the lady, her name is Stacy James, told us we're going to walk up on the bridge as a group. What I did not realize is on that bridge were banners, Lost Voices of Fentanyl, and Can You See Me Now banners. So Can You See Me Down was strapped to the rails on one side, and Lost Voices of Fentanyl was strapped to the rails on the other side. And I walked onto that bridge with 500 other people, and I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed because now I was standing on a bridge over the Arkansas River. I could have bailed quickly, but I didn't, with 500 other people looking at thousands of faces that were just like my son.
Wow.
And I was crying. And I'm a big guy, and guys aren't supposed to cry. Somebody told me one time, big boys don't cry, but real men do. So I don't care who sees me cry. If I'm getting emotional and tears start rolling down my face, I'm powerless to keep it from happening. So on that bridge, Stacy she said a few words, and I realized that I was in the middle of a memorial of people that had died from this crisis.
Wow.
And she started reading names. And I mean, I was just bawling the whole time. Luckily, I had people with me that were kind of holding me up. And when she got done reading the names, I walked over to her and I said, I would like to include Logan's name for any future events that you might have. And she, without thinking, just picked up a piece of paper and wrote his name down. And she hugged me, and she hugged me so hard that all my broken pieces went back into place. And it's that moment that I realized I had to be involved. I had to do something to fight this fentanyl crisis. And I was talking to a friend yesterday. Addiction has always been an issue. Back when I was a kid, it was addiction to alcohol. And then, here comes the Vietnam Veterans Home and their morphine and marijuana, that kind of thing. And there was always been experimentation. I remember Art Linkletter's daughter dying from an overdose because she thought she could fly. And it was that rare. That memory sticks in my mind because we didn't hear about it all the time. Now the street drug supply is so incredibly poisoned with fentanyl and xylazine that one pill, one wrong move, and you don't get another chance. So I started going to meetings that Hope Movement Coalition has on a monthly basis. And there was, at one of the meetings, they said, well, we've got to raise money. We're going to do Bridge the Gap again. And so I started going to people that I knew that had money, that knew about my story, and I started telling them my story. And money started rolling in. I was impressed. I was impressed that people I knew actually cared enough to contribute money to something that hadn't yet affected them personally.
Yeah.
But because they knew me and they knew the struggles that Logan and I had, and they knew that he had died from this, they gave from their heart. So the more and more active I got and the more and more willing I became to tell my story and Logan's story, I was asked to become a board member for Hope Movement Coalition. So now I serve on the executive board of that nonprofit organization as the chair of development. And I do what I can to raise money. I do what I can to stop stigma and to tell Logan's story, celebrate everybody that I find that's in recovery and try to support them in their journey, because stigma is killing our children. Yelling at them all day to not make bad choices does not fix it. You know as well as I do, addiction is not a choice. It's a mental illness. It's a disease, and we have to treat it as such, or as a society, we're going to continue to lose people. I'm really mad at the Sackler family and that whole pharmaceutical thing that got the whole opioid epidemic started.
Yeah.
I don't think that they have been held accountable enough, because they're sitting on trillions of dollars, and I just don't think that's right. Even if they gave all of that money to me, it would not bring my son back.
Right. Right.
I don't know how you hold them accountable.
Yeah.
And that's not my lane. My lane is awareness and prevention.
Well, since that day that you got the hug where all your pieces fell back together again, and stepping into a life of purpose to illuminate this story of fentanyl and how it has impacted so many families, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned that I had it all wrong before Logan died. I've learned compassion.
Well, tell me what you learned that you thought you knew before he died and what you've learned after his passing.
I thought Logan could choose to not be an addict. Since then, I've learned that opioids, and his drug of choice was heroin, opioids make a physiological change in the brain, and your ability to make good decisions is overridden by the beast that opioid creates in the brain that just feeds on more opioids. Go get me some more. Go get me some more. I promise you it'll be less painful if you just go get some more drugs than if you detox. People are scared to detox. The stigma around my son's addiction, even in my own immediate family, has changed since that time, because I am so vocal and I do speak to them all the time about addiction and what it really is. I wrote the book, Logan's Story. My father read it, and he even told me that he learned things about Logan and about addiction that he didn't know before.
Right.
And he was always about, it's all about choices. It's all about choices. And it's not all about choices. He understands that now, and that makes my heart happy. Doesn't save Logan, but it makes my heart happy. So I've learned that as human beings, we generally don't have compassion for anyone else outside of our own skin. Maybe some for immediate people that might reside in our houses with us. And we oftentimes treat our pets better than we treat other human beings. So what I've learned, I've always been a compassionate person. I've always been a bit of an empath, but now it's more clear, if that makes sense. It's more in the front of my mind instead of just something. Because now when I look at somebody in a grocery store, and I can look at somebody and see in their eyes that there's some pain that they're carrying. And if they drop something in the floor, I'm going to bend down and pick it up for them. I'm not going to laugh because they dropped it in the floor. That kind of thing. Grief has taught me compassion. It's taught me love.
So I love that you self-identified as an empath, and in partly how I think about things is through opportunities, gifts, and lessons. And it sounds to me like through this experience, you actually have been able to be courageously authentic in your own empathy, and it's given rise for you to be an expression of that compassion and that love.
I feel that. And even though I believe in a higher power, God, in my book and on my podcast, I don't talk a lot about God. I don't talk about politics, period. It's just not allowed. And the reason I don't talk about God is because there are people, faiths that don't align with my upbringing or Christianity, that kind of thing. This fentanyl crisis doesn't care if you're Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, black, white. There is no discrimination, rich, poor. And so I don't want to push someone away because I speak about God. And so I just choose not to. But the things I talk about are all the things I believe that the true God tries to teach us. And it's just one rule, just one simple rule. And that's to love your fellow human. If we all loved our fellow human and were more compassionate towards each other, the world would not be in the mess that it's in right now.
I'm right there with you. And so I'm curious as to, your own kind of spiritual awakening and evolution in this, because that's how I think about it for myself. I grew up with a dad who was an Episcopal priest, but I am a believer in there are many paths to the summit. And so I believe that we each have a spirit and a soul, no matter what religion we believe or all of that. And so I think about being able to see the spirit that resides within each one of us, and to be able to, as I've been reading a book recently, kind of help illuminate that. And I think you're like a fire starter that way.
I feel like a fire starter sometimes. And I have a very dear friend that I've met through this whole ordeal that talks to me about God. Because when Logan died, I was so angry with God, I was convinced he did not exist, that there was no higher power. If there was, how could he take my son away from me? Now, I believe that Logan was here and taken because I'm at the point I am right now. My purpose is to try to prevent what's going on. I think that there's probably great wisdom in the higher power that knew I couldn't shut up and knew that I would be a fire starter and be out there talking about those things. When I go to meetings, and when I say meetings, it's not an AA meeting or an NA meeting. It's a meeting of our Hope Movement families. And mostly moms, because I can't get dads to participate because, they're dads. But there is hugs that I get and that I give, and we don't have to explain ourselves to each other. We talk to one another. We understand each other's pain, and we eat at potluck because food is good. And it's just more fellowship and community that has evolved out of this pain. Another thing that happened before Logan died is I had friends, and afterwards I had much fewer friends.
Yeah.
Not because I pushed them away, but because it scared them. They don't know what to say to me. Really, all I want them to do is say his name, acknowledge his life. Don't blow the flame out. You don't have to fan the flame and make it bigger, but you don't just blow it out. So it took me a few years to let go of those people who let go of me. And now I'm surrounded by such a wonderful group of people. That part doesn't cause me pain anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important message to deliver, Doug, is that when we get cracked wide open and others are afraid of that, they self-select out. Kind of how we defined our friendships and our really close relationships. For me, it was almost a dying of that notion and a rebirth of what was really important to me. And one of the things that I firmly believe is that the community that sees us, loves us, and hears us is one of the ways that we heal in the midst of trauma and tragedy. And so I'm so grateful that you walked that bridge, you went to that event, and that you were embraced and you were open to being embraced.
I can't even begin to tell you how happy I am that I went to that bridge. I can almost assure you that I wouldn't be here today had I not gone to that event. And I'm not even sure what compelled me, other than my friend Ann saying, hey, I'll go to this event with you if you want to go to this event. And Randy went with me, and there we were. I can't be political. But it was at the Clinton Library where it was happening, and Bill Clinton himself was there speaking. And I actually have had interaction with him before in my life. My family went to law school with him. They were very close with him. And when he realized who I was and came over, he had to run back up to the stage and say something, but he immediately came back and sat there and talked to me for about 5 or 10 minutes.
He's an extraordinary connector.
He is.
Yes. And takes it to another completely different level that I think is instructive, important for us to recognize that the ability for us to look people in the eye and to really see them and hear them and care about them in the moment is incredibly powerful.
I agree 100%. And not only him being that way, but everybody I have met through Hope Movement and through my advocacy has been that way. They see you in the moment, no judgment, and they just embrace you as a human being. And that gives me the freedom to be who I am and tell Logan's story, because I know I'm not going to be judged by them. But don't get me wrong, sometimes I tell it for the shock value just to get someone's attention. But
yeah, some people need to get their attention.
A good friend of mine from years ago that I haven't talked to in maybe 10, 12 years called me earlier this year and was like, oh my God, did Logan pass? And I said, yes. And we started having a conversation. Turns out she's going to be in Arkansas in June. And so she's going to be in Jonesboro, and I'm planning a trip to Jonesboro. So I'm going to get to see her and hug her neck and give her a copy of my book, because she knew Logan when he was a kid.
Right.
And we went to visit, and he played his harmonica, and he played the I Want to Go to the Swimming Pool Blues on a harmonica.
That's great.
That's just one of those fabulous memories that I have. So, and while I'm in Northeast Arkansas, you know, monthly we have a meeting here in Little Rock, Central Arkansas. Once a month there's a meeting in Northwest Arkansas, which is where Fayetteville and Bentonville, Walmart, Tyson, those big metropolitan area up there. And we have a lot of mamas from the rural area around Jonesboro, but we don't have meetings there. So we're taking the camper, we're going to a state park to be there for my friend's son's wedding. But on Saturday, I'm going to host whoever wants to come from that local area and, you know, just have some fellowship, just get to know those mamas, maybe a daddy or two. I've also learned that men grieve 100% different than women.
Yes.
And they seem to get over it really quick and then just shut up and move on and never have another conversation about it. I did not get that gene, because I'm going to talk about it until I don't have breath in my body anymore.
Well, I think there's things going on internally that go unexpressed. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
And my experience is, you know, I have a very dear friend out of California, the Fresno area, Jim Horton, which I need to connect you with, who also lost a son around the same time. And you're needed as voices for men, because most of the time I am talking to moms, but actually truly, and this is been illuminating for me is I'm often talking to recovering addicts because parents or sibs or spouses are much more captive to the stigma and the shame of this disease than I ever thought.
Yes, this disease does not affect a person. It affects a whole family. It affects a community. My uncle, Logan, is not the first one that died in my family from substance abuse. I had a cousin that was closer to Logan's age than he was to my age anyway, but his dad was a Vietnam vet. And after he died from an overdose and had been clean for months, and his mom dropped him off to visit with some friends, didn't hear from him for over 24 hours. And when she went back, she walked into a house, everyone was dead.
Wow.
I don't even know how she
Ooh.
wakes up in the morning, and my heart goes out to her.
Wow.
So my uncle lasted for 14 months and couldn't handle the guilt of whatever he felt in his head, and he took his own life. And one of my missions in life is to make sure that men do the hard work of grieving and getting through the grief. You never end up on another side, but you end up in a better place where you grow, I call them grief muscles, because you can carry the grief more than you could in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's devastating for moms. It's just as devastating for dads. It's just dads deal with it differently.
Right. Yeah.
A Vietnam vet lost his son to addiction. He was a heavy drinker before his son died, and the guilt just
Ate him.
overwhelmed him. And he had no one to talk to.
Yeah.
He had no community.
Yeah. And I was married to a Vietnam vet who was an alcoholic and dealt with post-traumatic stress. And well, it was long after we had divorced that he actually got sober and put the demons to bed. He actually visited Vietnam. But those years that I was with him was so clear about the excruciating pain that they came home with. And that for him was stacked on top of childhood trauma too. And so for me, understanding and unwrapping a little bit relative to the traumas that a lot of us experience, and particularly in the world of substance use disorder, when you boil it all back, trauma is usually at the root of what's going on. Yeah. And so I also think that through Sam's experience, I don't begin to know all the things that happened to him, and I will probably never know. But I will say that his journey opened my journey in a profound way. And I've dealt with my own traumas because of it. And I think I've become a better human because of it. And I think that is one of the gifts inherent in the possibilities of this, is that we can drop the masks and the armor and begin to be who we really are.
Who we're intended to be. Yes.
Correct.
Yes. I agree 100%. And so now I spend all of my time, and I tell Logan's story just because that's Logan's story, but raising awareness and loving people where they're at in addiction is crucial as far as I'm concerned. Because you know as well as I do, you can't force somebody into being sober. It's just not going to happen. And especially if you don't treat the underlying trauma or whatever is causing it. So I find it so much easier to be compassionate with people in addiction, whether they're actively using now or whether they're celebrating 1 month, 1 year, 10 years worth of sobriety. Meet them where they're at. And it's much easier on me and my heart, because I'm not trying to fix it for them. I'm just trying to be present and give them an arm to lean onto, or just walk the path with them. I can't fix anybody's addiction. Nobody can fix anybody else's addiction, but we can certainly be present. And that's my goal, is to be present. I've got a friend opening up a new rehab facility that is going to be amazing, with medical detox there. There's men's unit and a women's unit.
Mm-hmm.
No neon or fluorescent lights. They're all incandescent. It's
Mm-hmm.
more of a homey atmosphere and less medical looking,
Yeah.
because trying to get somebody reset in their brain in a medical environment just doesn't cut it. And that's my opinion. And so, and his too, obviously. But he's taken a great holistic approach to the whole thing and looking at what it takes to reset someone and help
Right.
them reset themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sam now has been clean and sober for a little over 2 years. And really, I just kind of held my breath to a certain extent for the first year and a half, because I'm like, he needs to his brain needs to do some healing. And then it's rewiring the neural pathways for a healthy life and being able to be present in his own skin and be the loving man that he truly is. And so I applaud those who are putting programs together that look at the longevity of the journey for people who are dealing with substance use disorder. I also think about the longevity of our journey as those who love someone. I'm sure you've told Logan's story 100 times. I'm curious as to the wisdom that you tell through your journey that will impact other dads.
I've had people come and talk to me after I've told my story or have heard that I've been telling my story. I do have people reach out. Oddly enough, it's in a clandestine manner because, they don't want to be
Sure.
perceived as being weak.
Right.
So I don't know that I personally call it wisdom, although I'm now Medicare age. So maybe with those years comes
Mhm.
wisdom anyway, because I always thought my grandparents were the smartest humans on the planet. Now I realize it's because they had more experience than us and probably hit more speed bumps in the road than we did. My experience and my wisdom comes from hitting every speed bump, stumping
Mhm.
my toe on every tree root on the path. And I guess the wisdom part of it is learning how to tell that story, learning how to express how to love someone in addiction, whether it's active addiction or recovery.
Yeah, there's another part to the story that I think is important, Doug, is it's a courageous act to love deeply. And you are courageous and you're loving deeply. And it's not just hitting the speed bumps, it's getting up from the speed bumps. It's learning to rise. It's seizing another day to do this thing we call life. And you are an expression of courage and resiliency and purpose and contribution. And we need more of those.
I appreciate those kind words. I really do, because
Mm-hmm.
that gives me the strength to keep going. And sometimes I ball up in my bed in the fetal position and just cry with pain because I miss my son.
Right.
And then when that's done, flash water on my face, wipe my face off, and I walk back out here and I sit down and do a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Or I get up and go on a hike. I've got a new dog that's just barely over a year old. He's part pit bull and part chihuahua. It's kind of an odd little mix. He's got that great pit
Ah,
bull
shoot.
personality and little bitty legs. But he can hike 4 or 5 miles with me. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I find a lot of peace. That's where I find the ability to
Mm-hmm.
think, because it's out there with nature.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I take my shoes off and just let my feet touch the ground.
Right.
It's the whole grounding. I've learned how to breathe. I've learned how to feel anxiety start to come over me. And there are, I guess I identify the triggers, and I've learned to take deep breaths. If I'm going to be talking to somebody who is in active addiction, I might say a little prayer first. I might take a few
Mm-hmm.
deep breaths so that my brain is in the right place and that I'm doing it for them and not for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just rattled off a number of ways that you take care of yourself so that you can do the work that you're meant to do in the world. That I think is, why I wanted to do this podcast around thriving while loving an addict is we've got work to do to self-care. We have to take care of ourselves so that we can do the work that we're meant to do and live the purpose that we're here to express. And so I get out in nature as much as possible. I ground my feet to the earth as much as possible. We have cats, but I think having a pet is super, super helpful. The breathing, obviously. And I think that's really interesting that you've learned to breathe.
You have to, because
Yeah.
when things roll over you like a tidal wave, it takes your breath away. And if you don't realize what's going on, I mean, physiologically, you could hyperventilate and hit the floor. Knowing that that's coming and knowing how to ride on top of that wave instead, I think is crucial. So sometimes I'll even just turn around and take a deep breath, especially if I'm talking to a group or some people and I start to feel overwhelmed with emotion.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not worried that somebody sees me cry, I don't want to just turn into a blubbering fool in front of a bunch of people. So I'll turn around and I'll take 2 or 3 very deep breaths, very purposeful breaths, and then I turn back around. And I not only learned that through this grief process, but in my everyday life, but not so much since Logan gone. My partner and I have a non-medical home care agency, and we take care of mostly dementia patients. And so trying to get them to de-escalate.
Right.
Sometimes to get them to take a breath, you can't say, just breathe. You have to say, oh, do you smell that? And then they take a big, deep breath.
Oh,
And then
wow.
they calm down a little bit. I'm trying to find an exit ramp for that particular part of my life, because being an end-of-life doula is taking a toll on me. My very favorite client passed in March, and it hit me very hard. Lucky enough, I have a partner that goes up there and tends to the business, and I don't have to be there as much. I still do back office work. I still answer the phones, but I'm trying to not attach myself to somebody I know is going to be dead soon. And they're at the end of life, and they've had a fabulous journeys, and I can't even begin to tell you the amazing stories that I've heard from these people and the amazing outpouring of love when Logan died from the group that was around me at that point. It happened so suddenly, and I was gone from the building so quickly that they didn't have a sympathy card, because, you know, their generation is all about, let me send a card. I'm going to write a card.
Yes.
So the activity director, and there was about 100, a little more than 100 people living in the building where we do most of our work. She brought them a poster board and folded it in half and started passing it around. And I still have that poster board in my bedroom now. And occasionally I take it out and look at it. Most of the people on there are gone.
Right.
They're there, which makes me also a little bit happy, because I know that they're there. And don't think at the end of somebody's life, I don't say, hey, when you get up there, tell my mama and my son I miss them so much. Those are words I tell people that are dying, and they're like, oh, okay, I will, I promise.
Right. Wow. Well, we're kind of at the top of our time together. I do want to ask, like, if somebody, like a man, wants to reach out to you, how would they get a hold of you? And then how do they get a hold of your book? And what's your podcast? And how do people access you?
So I have a website, logansvoice.com. And on that website is access to the podcast, links to like Apple Music or Apple Podcast and Spotify and Amazon Music and iHeartRadio. I'm not even sure how I got it on all of those places, but it happened. And I'm very pleased with it. And also on there is a link to a swag shop that we have that is Logan's Voice. I actually have one of the shirts on now. And the wings of the book, because, angels are angels, right? But I'm convinced Logan's wings aren't just white or gold.
Yeah.
They're kind of, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, multicolored.
They are, because he was a very colorful human being.
Yeah.
There's a direct link to Amazon to be able to buy the book. It's in ebook format. I guess Kindle is what it's called. I've got a paperback and a hardback of it. And people can find me on Facebook as Rex Logan's dad. I had to use his whole name because somebody already had Logan's dad.
Sure.
So I'm
Okay.
Rex Logan's dad. And my email is rexlogansdad@gmail.com.
Fantastic.
If you find me on Facebook and send me an instant message, we start talking, I'm very likely to give you a phone number where you can speak to me. I go to bed early. I wake up early, but I do not even care about being woken up in the night if there's someone in distress that needs to talk to me.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you. The human that you have become and are evolving into is pretty extraordinary.
Thank
And
you.
I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing and the lives that you're touching and transforming. And please continue to take care of yourself so you can continue doing this work.
Thank you.
And for our audience, if you know someone who really needs to talk to this man, please pass his information on. Make that connection, because you have no idea how their lives can change in an instant like yours did.
Yes. Yes. I'm here. I'm willing to talk to people. Thank
So
you so
again,
much for having me.
absolutely, absolutely. So everybody take a deep breath and thrive.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.